Out tonight. We're going to have a packed schedule and hopefully learn a thing or two. So before we get into that though, I would like to go around the room and do some introductions. Let us know why you're here, what you're hoping to get out of Gateway Crypto. And Aaron, if we would start with you.
My name is Aaron Munzer. I got into me, Stefano, and Jeff started Gateway Crypto. Originally we were looking for business ideas to start. We couldn't find really good resources. And we decided to bring people together and become a resource for the blockchain industry in St. Louis, and that's what we're doing here.
My name is Shane Harris. Me and Rob started Verneris Mining, which is just a data processing platform that kind of puts power in more of the people's hands rather than the corporations. I'm super excited about working with Gateway Crypto. They're becoming an awesome resource and hopefully the go-to resource for this kind of thing in St. Louis. So.
Robert Brenneman, I'm his business partner. We started this company up together and it's really come a long way since our early ideas as far as our mission with it, what we want to do with it, and we're going to present that to you guys also. Hopefully you'll have a better idea.
My name is Ricky Brenneman. I'm an observer and here for support. I read the news and I see that blockchain is huge and know it's going to be something in the future, so I'm curious about it.
I'm Nicole Brenneman and I love my brother. Enough to come here.
Come listen to a whole bunch of nerds.
I'm Joy Brenneman and I'm Rob's mom. And I'm very proud of him, but I have no idea what he's doing.
Excellent.
My name's Corey, I'm Rob's dad, so I'm here to support him. I'm a local businessman, I'm a CPA, I'm a financial advisor here in town. I know a little bit about crypto. Rob and I have had discussions over the years about it, and so I'm here to, with an open mind, just to hear what's going on in the technology. Awesome.
Hello everyone, my name is Chris Deshawn, and I'm here to learn more about cryptocurrencies and the prospects of educating people about cryptocurrencies. And I run a sawmill and farm for my day job, and enjoy rock climbing.
Cool.
I'm Stefano. I am the city treasurer of Gateway Crypto. My background into crypto in general started just by buying some, trading a little bit, just trying to get familiar and have a little bit of fun, and that kind of caused me to start to dive deeper into everything that was going on behind the scene in terms of what it meant, how the technology worked, how it came to be, what role it can play in economics, society, finance, law. The more that I kept digging, the more I kept finding, the more interesting it all became, and eventually that led to meeting Aaron and Jeff. Like Aaron had mentioned, we discussed the idea of maybe getting into some sort of business together, but more than anything, what we realized is that St. Louis needed a place for people that also were interested to kind of come together, pool resources, share information, and just sort of foster the development of this growing industry. We saw a lot of sort of siloed efforts, but nothing sort of cohesive that was really trying to push the industry forward in a longer term kind of way. So that's what inspired us to start doing what we're doing. This is the very first formal meeting of this kind that we're having as Gateway Crypto, but we're really excited to just kind of keep pushing at it. More than anything, we have seen clearly, and at this point there's been buy-in from people in positions of traditional power that have shown that there's some validity to what's going on with the technology, and we would hate to see St. Louis, which does have a rich financial history in the United States, miss out on the development of an industry going forward. So more than anything, we're just trying to make sure that St. Louis plays some sort of role in the development of this industry as it goes forward. So that's me, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I'm John. I'm a mathematician, and my primary interest is in the part that blockchain will play in future financial and economic industries.
Awesome. Brandon, you introduce yourself?
Hello everybody, I'm Brandon. I met Jeff through Toastmasters. I have an interest in cryptocurrency. A friend of mine wanted me to invest into it a year ago. Didn't really some of the details about it, and really just open my eyes to a few things and pique my interest in it again. So here to learn all that I can and see how I can get involved with crypto and see how I can help with the group. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Jeff King. I got involved with cryptocurrency a little over a year ago, and it started with just a graphics card in the computer and started mining, and eventually it started growing and realizing that it's not just about cryptocurrency, but it's about blockchain technology and how some of those fundamentals can really change not only the world, but multiple different industries. So my background was in computer science. I learned about it through cryptography. So my big interest is all of the privacy-based coins, anything that has to do with end-to-end encrypted messages, and really making sure that we're holding our privacy, especially online, which is something that we typically give up, to a very high standard. And I think that this is something, especially blockchain, that can disrupt the industry. And then in my day job, I'm a real estate advisor, so seeing and understanding how real estate and title and all kinds of different things that really involve a lot of middlemen in the real estate industry, how blockchain can effectively either make the process a lot smoother, a lot faster, a lot more efficient, and really to just making the world essentially a place where we're decentralized, where there's no one company, one government, one country that's complete and totally has their hand in everything. So that was kind of some of the like-mindedness that when we sat down for Gateway Crypto, we all started talking about how we were really coming from a ton of different backgrounds. And I think that's what the most important thing is to remember with blockchain is that it can impact every single industry, and outside of the industries that we're all in personally, we love to hear about what that can be and what those use cases are. So definitely here to learn and hear what everyone has to say. So thanks for introducing yourselves. We'll kind of move into the presentation on blockchain technology. This is going to be really an intro to blockchain, and Stefano's going to lead the way with that. So help me welcome Stefano and welcome Steve.
As a quick preface to this, please, any immediate feedback that you have, jot down. If you don't feel comfortable sharing it with me, Jeff, or Aaron, share it with whoever you are comfortable sharing it with so that it gets back to us. This is the first version of this presentation, but our goal is to make something that's accessible for as many people as possible. We want to be able to branch off and have different kinds of conversations depending on the audience, but we want it to be a relatively general type of presentation that we can present to someone who knows nothing about crypto or to somebody that has a deep understanding and be able to kind of flow and move from that direction. So feedback is absolutely welcome. So the kind of elephant in the room is blockchain. What is it? Why does it matter? In order to answer that question, as I started, I'm sorry, I'm going to backtrack a little bit further, because you can find a lot of people that have a lot to say about blockchain on the internet. Not all of it, in my experience, is actually very helpful. Partially because it tends to be nerdier kind of folks that get into it, and we can get kind of lost in the weeds, so to speak, of all of the technical underpinnings of the cryptography or all the different ways that the different blockchains have come to work. People tend to get lost in trying to explain. So as I was researching, what I realized is I actually needed to wind the clocks back a little bit to be able to understand what blockchain is in a context that makes it concrete and makes it matter outside of it just being this abstract, interesting software, right? So the question that led me to is, well, actually, what is money? My simple definition of money is that it is an innovation of or on counting that emerged as a solution to the problem of trade, right? So money has three main properties that economists tend to agree on. One is that it is a unit of a account, right? So that's where I kind of get the idea that it's an innovation of counting. Because the idea is you want to be able to account for something that you have in some way, shape, or form. Money allows you to do that. The other thing that it is a store of value. So if you have a certain amount of value in a unit of account, you are trusting to a certain degree that that value is going to stay relatively consistent, right? If you buy eggs for $3 today, you're going to be able to do that next week for $3 as well. And finally, and probably most importantly, as the solution to the problem of trade, is that money creates a medium of exchange. So if you've got something that is a unit of account, a store value, and a medium of exchange, you immediately have money. So a practical example of this is we can imagine a town, tribe, society, small collection of people, each of which have different interests and skill sets, right? So you've got one person that's really into lumber and wood, they've got a forest in their backyard, they've got a whole bunch of trees, they've got more trees than they know what to do with. You've got another guy who's into goats, he's raising goats, he's got cheese, he's got milk, he's got meat, more than he knows what to do with, and finally someone else that's growing wheat. So all of these people have something that they need and something that other people need. What they don't have immediately without money is an easy and efficient way of getting the right things to the right people at the right time, right? So without money, you've got a few layers of complexity that get added onto trade. For example, Bob the builder with his logs would have to be able to price his logs in goats and in wheat and in every other skill or trade or good that someone in his community may have in order to be able to exchange with people. So he's got to be keeping hundreds, probably, of different prices for his lumber in mind when he tries to have exchange with someone. As soon as you introduce something like money, you have a universal way of accounting for the value of the things that you own and the things that you need, and an efficient way of then moving those things around so that you don't have either wasted resources or you're not able to get the resources that you do need. So from money, the next thing that emerged and that you need to understand in order to make sense of blockchain and why it matters is banking, right? So what is banking? Banking started as lending. So it's just like, I've got a bunch of wood, you need to start a fire, you don't have wood today, but you're growing some trees, let me go ahead and give you some wood, and when I need wood down the road, you're gonna help me out and give me wood. That was formalized into a business practice, right? And it actually started in the ancient world. The earliest records of any form of banking were merchants along trade routes. And part of what they would do is farmers or traders that were going along these trade routes, they would lend either wheat or some other crop or seed to, in order to collect interest or a return on that thing that they were lending out. So people realize, if I'm abundant, I can lend stuff out to people and I can actually get a little bit more than I had to begin with by turning this into a business practice instead of just doing it as a favor for my friends. So that's like early, let's call it proto-banks. The next major sort of like milestone in the evolution of banking happened in ancient Greece and Rome in temples. And the two innovations that matter that were introduced around that time is accepting deposits and exchanging money. So up until this point, the closest thing we had to banking was just people lending stuff out. We get to this point, and now here's a temple, it's safe, it's a central place in the community that everyone knows they can get to when they need to. I will actually hold on to your money for you. And if you're traveling or you're a traveler coming through and you need a different kind of money for where you're going or coming from, I can actually go ahead and change that out for you. Then we get to Renaissance Italy, which is where the banks that we kind of know and recognize today started to develop. And that there are various recognizable Italian names that basically began the practice of banks as like branches, to where one family would own one organization with multiple locations that did the lending and the exchanging of money, but this was brought outside of the temple. So it's no longer a temple, it's a private family doing the accepting of deposits, exchanging of money in multiple branches around the country of Italy. From there, in Europe, is when we really get to essentially modern times. Like all of the pieces that we know and recognize as banking today came into place. So that includes fractional reserve banking, and it includes the first state-run central bank. So fractional reserve banking, for anyone that doesn't know, is essentially that a bank is allowed, or a bank realized that they could lend out more money than they actually had in the vault. And that if they did that in the right way at the right time, they could keep the money moving, and they could keep earning interest, making money, without the need to actually hold on to everything that they were
that they were loaning out. And then a state-run central bank basically just means that your government controls and the rules around the production, circulation, and use of money within the country. So instead of it being a sort of like, let's say, decentralized practice, it's one that the government controls. The last innovation worth mentioning happened in the United States. I think it was around the 1950s, 60s. But it was a diners club in New York. So up until this point, you had a lot of businesses use what's called a charge card, to where here's a card, you can run up a tab, at the end of the month, you pay off that whole tab. Jeff McNamara in New York City was the first to organize various restaurants together to group and have a charge card that could be accepted at multiple different merchants. Eventually, that led to the creation of Bank Americard, which was Bank of America's version of it, which evolved into Visa, and the industry kind of developed from there. When Sears started Discover Card, they actually ended up buying McNamara's Diners Club, and that was included in what is today Discover. So we understand money, we understand banking. This right here looks, I think, on the surface about as complicated as blockchain can look when you first find it. But this is what happens every time that you swipe your card to buy something today. So when you swipe your card, you're the card holder. You enter into a business to give them $100. First, the business is going to have some sort of merchant processing service that is going to check with the card issuer, whoever gave that card to the card holder, to make sure that the funds are available. Then, well, my apologies, the merchant processor is here. It's either the acquirer themselves as the merchant processor, or there may be a third party on top of it. But they're checking to make sure that the funds are available, and then moving the funds from the issuer's balance sheet to the acquirer's balance sheet to then put it in a bank account for the merchant. So what is blockchain? The simplest way to think about blockchain is it's really just a database. It's a ledger. It's just a record of money moving in and out, of transactions. Part of what makes it special is the cryptography that Jeff mentioned at the beginning, which is just fancy computer science and math that enables what people call trust-minimized distributed applications. So what does trust-minimized distributed application mean? Instead of, on this slide, having to trust that these two banks are going to be honest about how much money is available and that they're going to move the money the way that they're supposed to, you can actually have a distributed network of computers that's managing that process instead. Instead of two major banks, you've got a series of computers on a network that are doing it, and because of the cryptography, you don't actually need to know or trust any of those computers. Because of the math and science built into blockchain, you know that when you transact, it will happen the way that you expect it to. So actually one final point I want to highlight this because it's really important that the applications that are enabled, the trust minimized applications that are enabled by blockchain are not limited to money. So money is the one that we kind of think of the most, but it is not where it has to stop. So Bitcoin is simply the very first successful blockchain application, which also happens to be a digital currency. It solved the two main problems with distributed electronic money systems up until that point, because people were experimenting with the idea of digital money. The main issue you have, the same way that when I download a song from iTunes or somewhere on the internet, I can make a copy and send it to a bunch of people. If I have digital money, what's to stop me from making copies or from sending the same money to multiple different people at the same time? So blockchain prevented that double spend problem, and it also, because the computers on the network have to agree when a transaction happens, getting those computers to agree is a problem that is called the Byzantine generals problem. So this video is going to go into a little bit deeper explanation about how exactly blockchain solves both of these problems.
At a very basic level, Bitcoin is just a digital file on a ledger that contains names and balances. People exchange money by changing this file. When Bob sells Carol a lawnmower for 5.2 Bitcoins, Bob's balance goes up by 5.2 and Carol's down by 5.2. There's no gold or government-issued money backing these numbers. Bob is only willing to trade his real-life lawnmower for a higher number in this digital file because he has faith that other people will also trust the system. So who maintains this ledger and makes sure no one cheats? One goal of Bitcoin is to avoid any centralized control, so every participant maintains their own copy of the ledger. One surprising consequence of this is that everyone can see everyone else's balances, although the real system only uses account numbers and not names, so there's some level of anonymity. If everyone maintains their own ledger, how are all the ledgers kept in sync as money is transferred? At a basic level, when you want to send money, you simply tell everyone else by broadcasting a message with your account number, the receivers, and the amount. Everyone across the entire world then updates their ledger. As a quick aside, I'm describing how Bitcoin works for power users, people who help maintain the system. You can also just use the system to send and receive money now, without maintaining a ledger. If sending money is as simple as creating a message with some account numbers, what's to stop a thief, Alice, from spending Bob's money by using his account number? Like a pen and paper check, Bitcoin requires a kind of signature to prove that the sender is the real owner of an account, but it's based on math rather than handwriting. When a new account number is created, it comes along with a private key mathematically linked to that account number. If you've heard of a Bitcoin wallet, these keys are what it holds and are what allow you to create signatures. To create a signature, a private key and the text from a transaction are fed into a special cryptographic function. Another function allows other people to check the signature, making sure it was created by the account owner and that it applies to that specific transaction. Unlike the handwritten version, these signatures can't be copied and reused in the future, as they're unique to each transaction. While the mathematical signatures prove who sent a transaction, they can't prove when it was sent, and this turns out to be problematic. In our traditional banking system, if Alice wrote 2 checks but only had enough money to cover one of them, the bank would pay the first person attempting to cash his check, but refuse the second because Alice's account would be empty. So the order of these checks is critical because it determines who should get paid. Unfortunately, order is much harder to determine in Bitcoin, where instead of a single bank, there are individuals all over the world. Network delays might cause transactions to arrive in different orders in different places, and fraudsters could lie about timestamps. 2 recipients might both think their transaction is first and ship a product, effectively allowing Alice to spend money twice. Bitcoin prevents this by providing a way for the entire world to decide on transaction order. As new transactions are created, they go into a pool of pending transactions, and from here they'll be sorted into a giant chain that locks in their order. To select which transaction is next, a kind of mathematical lottery is held. Participants select a pending transaction of their choice and begin trying to solve a special problem that will link it to the end of the chain. The first person to find a solution wins and gets to have their transaction selected as next in the chain. So what's this linking problem? It's based on a special function called a cryptographic hash. As scary as this sounds, it just mixes up its inputs and spits out a number, but it's special because it's irreversible. There's no easy way to start with an output and then find an input that generates it other than by making lots of guesses. And this is literally what people are doing in Bitcoin, feeding this function random numbers until the output meets certain criteria. Besides a random guess, you also input a transaction from the pending pool and chain, which is where the linking part comes in. So the lottery provides a way for the entire world to decide which transaction is next, but the math behind it also helps ensure everyone agrees about past transactions too. Suppose you're joining the network for the first time and request a copy of the transaction chain to get caught up, but receive several different versions. Which one should you trust? Ideally, you would trust the one that the majority of people are using, but determining this on the internet is difficult. What would stop a single person from voting millions of times? Bitcoin prevents this by requiring people to solve math problems to vote. This causes each vote to have a cost in computing power, making it unlikely that a single person or group could ever afford to outvote or outcompute the majority of users. The transaction ordering process described before actually provides the voting system. Part of the input to the linking problem is a transaction from the end of a chain, so each guess is effectively a vote for that chain. But how are all the votes tallied? Because the cryptographic hash function has well-defined statistical properties, you can look at any given answer and estimate how many guesses it took to find it, just like estimating how many coin flips it would take to get 100 heads in a row. So the links in a chain not only put transactions in order, but also act as an effective vote tally, making it easy to see which chain most people are using. Finally, how does money get created? Every time someone wins the lottery to pick the next transaction in the chain, new bitcoins are created out of thin air and awarded to their account. Solving these problems is commonly called mining, as this is how money enters the system, but the main purpose of the math is to make sure everyone's ledgers agree. The math simply provides a convenient way to randomly distribute money into the world. In fact, sometime around 2140, no more money will be created and participants will only be paid from fees added onto transactions. I hope this gives you a quick sense for how Bitcoin works. If you'd like a more detailed summary, check out my 22-minute video, How Bitcoin Works Under the Hood.
And there's one final concept I want to touch on a little bit before.
The goal of this video is to explain how Bitcoin works under the hood, to give a clearer idea of what it really means to own, send, or mine Bitcoin.
Before I pass on to Berneris Mining, and that is the idea of a smart contract, which is another example of a kind of application that is enabled by blockchain technology, and one that is particularly important for a lot of the other. It enables a whole lot more than just the accounting and transfer of money like Bitcoin does. So with a smart contract, you can effectively program terms and conditions around the transfer of money, right? So with Bitcoin, you don't need a bank for me to transact with Jeff for his MacBook, right? But maybe I would still need lawyers to help me draft an agreement and to help and a legal system to help me enforce an agreement with Jeff should I find out within 10 days that actually there's something wrong with that MacBook that he didn't disclose to me. So with a smart contract instead, ahead of time, we can program terms and conditions into the transfer of money. We can both audit what the terms and conditions of that smart contract are ahead of time, and neither of us, even me as the creator, can edit that smart contract after it's been created. So it's another critical and important thing that is enabled by blockchain technology. So with that said, I will go ahead and introduce our guests for this roundtable, Berneris Mining, and let them steal the show. So thank you guys very much.
I want to say something real quick about the presentation. Before we present that is,
Sure.
did all of that, or at least enough of that, kind of make sense? Because a large portion of the reason we're here is to, make sure that everybody can understand. Now, their presentation is more geared towards the intricacies of it that would interest people that have a background in this kind of industry, would understand better. But were there any parts that, do you guys have any questions?
Yeah.
This is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I barely know how to turn a computer on, so I'm not the right person to ask.
No, that's exactly what I want to ask, though. I mean, do you understand why people care about cryptocurrencies
Yeah,
more?
I understand more, definitely,
More.
because I knew nothing coming in.
Okay. And are there any glaring questions? It looks like there's at least one. Yes.
Yeah, so it sounded like you have to do math to send money.
Basically, you have to set up a computer that will do math for you.
You don't.
I was like, how is so brilliant?
That's something that kind of Berneris Mining touches on too. All that math that needs to be done to bring that the new currencies into the ecosystem. Like Bitcoin is producing new currencies until around 2140, right? At this rate. Well, it's more than just producing those currencies. Like he also said, the blockchain is more than just currency transactions. It's any kind of data transaction. So you can then use that, the blockchain technology to, rather than just mint new money, you can use it for other applications as well. Is it queued up just to start after this, or?
And as an accountant, do you think that was a good segue using Maggie to describe?
Yeah, I mean, I see it as, I really personally see it as two different things. I think the future, in my mind again,
Right.
the future of this is the technology. I think the currency, personally, will be a weight on it to bring it into mainstream, because the currency and the lack of stability in the currency will keep people from embracing the blockchain technology that's tied to the currency aspect of it right now.
Right.
So,
A big thing.
but I think the blockchain technology application is something that can be way outside of just currency exchange.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. It's essentially just a new method of sending information from one person to another, and that's, everything we do is if-then statements. All of our programs that we use, if this happens, then this is the result. If this happens, then this happens. And it's kind of the same way. So he talked about Stefano talked about how the transactions inside of the block, inside of that chain, are called the hash of the block. Well, the way mining and data processing works is that hash, out of all of the different transactions, will have one very, very specific solution almost that comes out of it. And what makes it secure is when these miners find that solution, it assigns that solution to the block. And if you were to go and try and change a transaction in the block after the solution had already been found, it would then change that solution.
Break the chain.
Every other node, every other computer on the system would notice, hey, this one's not right, and they would just override that one. Mass consensus. All right, well, why don't we get started, I guess. The data dilemma is what we're kind of calling the new trials we're going to have to face in this with this type of technology. And every day we use our phones more and more, we use our computers more and more, and on the back end, we don't even see businesses use the internet and technology more and more to drive our society. It's to the point where people don't even realize how much they rely on a system that they know nothing about. And the problem is this system isn't very secure, it's not very safe, and people, if they do know that, they don't realize quite how bad it could be. We create so much data on a regular basis, right, that we send to each other in the form of files, downloadable content, et cetera, that we rely on these major enterprises like ISPs, like AT&T or Comcast, to send this data between us, between people, between users. And mining and cryptocurrency mining, data processing, we think this is kind of a way to put the power of communication more in the individual person's hand rather than having to funnel everything through these major corporations. So we like to view the method of transferring data rather than everybody uses AT&T as a service to everybody produces the means of creating new data. So everything from pooling our resources as a whole to use in a more societally effective way rather than just focusing on sending pictures to each other over social media or playing games on the internet. And you can go ahead to the next slide and take over.
So yeah, the amount of processing power we require as a society to keep up with our day-to-day lives is getting more and more and very rapidly. So just between phones, in 2014, 2 billion gigabytes of data was transferred, and only 3 years later in 2017, 8 billion gigabytes was transferred. So we're seeing a very fast increase. Just recently, within the past couple of weeks, Red Dead Redemption 2 sold 17 million copies. Each one of these copies took an 88 gigabyte download, and most people, that took them about 15 hours. The minimum cost of the equipment to operate that game is about $500, and that's buying it secondhand, the TV, the console, everything.
Which brings us to the hardware required in order to keep up is getting more and more expensive. You can see this with the latest iPhone. The cost of the latest iPhone has doubled in the last 5 years. Before too long, if we keep up, the average middle-class American will not be able to afford the latest and greatest. Gaming, we see this in the gaming industry as well. The latest and greatest is virtual reality, and in order to run this, and it costs at least $2 grand in equipment. Yeah.
And that's just for our everyday use of this equipment. We rely on things that, they have a lot of power, especially nowadays. The new gaming consoles, the new cell phones, NVIDIA just released their new RTX data process, their new ray tracing data, which is supposed to be this completely new, huge step in data and processing data for that type of purpose. And these devices, they get expensive. A new PlayStation is $500. A new iPhone is $1,200 to $1,400, right? So we envision kind of a way where rather than having to buy the equipment that has all of this power built into it, rather than having to buy a PC with $1,000